Hello everyone, today I am going to breaking down the India and the United States new trade deal announced on 2nd February 2026, where relations were strained and what this deal means for India's oil imports and global ties. What has happened on 2nd Feb 2026? On 2nd Feb 2026, President Trump and Prime Minister Narendra Modi agreed to a trade deal that brings down US tariffs on Indian goods from about 50% to 18%. This happened after months of diplomatic and trade tension between the two countries. Under the deal, US tariffs on Indian exports cut to 18%. India agreed to reduce tariffs on US goods and open its market more. India also agreed to cut back on buying Russian oil and consider buying more from the US and Venezuela. This agreement eased tensions and is seen as a reset in the economic relationship between the world's two largest democracies. Why were the relations strained before? There are several sources of tension between India and the US. First, F-35 fighter jet offer. The US offered India the advanced F-35 stealth fighter jets, but India did not confirm the purchase. Instead, India continued to show interest in the Russian Su-57 fighter jet and other defense collaborations. This was viewed in Washington as India not fully aligning with US defense priorities. Second, Trump's mediation on India-Pakistan conflict. President Trump tried to mediate a ceasefire between India and Pakistan. However, India did not publicly accept US mediation efforts, and the Indian government did not highlight American involvement. This created some diplomatic awkwardness, suggesting New Delhi preferred bilateral or regional approaches rather than US intervention. Third, Russian oil purchases. India bought large amount of discounted Russian crude oil after the Ukraine war. The US disliked this because it felt India's spending on Russian oil indirectly helped Russia continue its war in Ukraine. That led the US to impose tariffs on Indian export in 2025. Here is an important question. Did the India and European Union free trade deal make the US uneasy? Yes, the India-Europe free trade deal, which was finalized just before this, likely added pressure. Washington saw India moving closer economically with the European Union. A sign India was diversifying its partners and reducing dependence on the US market alone. While the US traditionally welcomes stronger trade ties between democracies, a deep European Union deal may have nudged the US to act sooner to secure a bilateral understanding with India. What led the US to settle the trade deal after strain? After months of tension, including steep tariffs and diplomatic push and pull, both sides realized the economic harm. Indian exporters were hit by high tariffs. US businesses wanted clear, stable trade terms. Geopolitical competition with China also pushed both countries to reform ties. So the US offered a deal that lowered tariffs and sought cooperation on energy sourcing and trade. Here is another question. Did the US pressure India to stop buying Russian oil? Trump publicly claimed that India agreed to reduce purchases of Russian oil as part of the deal. India responded by welcoming lower tariffs but did not specifically confirm a complete halt in Russian oil purchases. India has already been reducing Russian oil imports gradually, in part due to market forces and diversification, but an immediate full stop would disrupt India's energy stability. Did India feel pressure from the US? Answer is yes. The high tariffs imposed in 2025 were a clear form of economic pressure. They made Indian exports costlier in the US market and were widely seen as leverage to influence India's strategic choices, especially on oil sources. Will India really end Russian oil purchases? India might gradually reduce Russian oil purchases, but a sudden stop is unlikely because India imports 90% of its oil and needs a stable energy supply. Switching suppliers like US or Venezuela, it will take time. In the conclusion, the US-India trade deal reduces tariffs and eases tensions. It was shaped by long-standing disagreements over defense, diplomacy, and energy choices. India did not fully align with US preferences, especially on Russian oil, but still found common ground to expand trade. The deal shows how economic diplomacy interacts with geopolitics in the 21st century. I hope you found this explanation helpful. Thank you for watching.